record. There we go. If you haven't already muted your mics, if you could do that as you're coming in, that would be absolutely fantastic. So thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm speaking from the unceded lands of the Whadjuk and Noongar people and pay my respect to elders past and present. And I extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. So this lived experience webinar today is hosted by AMPA, the Alliance for Neurodiversity and Disability in Glamour Professions Australia, and also the UniSQ Disability Network. AMPA's Code of Conduct does apply for this webinar, and I'll add a link to that in the chat. So today our speaker is Nikki Andersen. Nikki is AMPA's co-founder, and I also have the pleasure of calling her my colleague and friend. Nikki is an award-winning librarian, writer, speaker, and diversity and inclusion activist. She has a rare connective tissue disorder, which affects her vision, hearing, spine, and joints. She is disabled, chronically ill, and deaf, and speaks and writes about disability inclusion. Last year, Nikki wrote an article titled Chronically Honest, and I'll add a link to that in the chat for anyone who hasn't actually seen it. It's a fantastic read and was shared around quite a lot. And Nikki is continuing from that article today, sharing her experiences across her career as a disabled librarian. And one of the reasons that this work that Nikki does is so important is that a lot of attention is paid in libraries, other glamour organisations, and also in higher education to students and clients with a disability. And we often see less of a focus on understanding the experience and needs of disabled employees. And so with that, I will mute myself and hand over to Nikki Andersen to share with us today.
Thank you so much, Amelia, and thank you to everyone joining me for this presentation today. I'd also like to start by acknowledging the lands that I'm on today, the lands of the Jawa and Ngaibu peoples in the Darling Downs region of southeast Queensland. It's the lands I've been lucky to grow up on and call home, and it's a really beautiful area that the Jawa and Ngaibu peoples have been custodians of for thousands of years. So as Amelia said, I'm a librarian at a university, and I also have a degenerative connective tissue disorder called Stickler syndrome. It's one part of my identity, but also responsible for everything I am. A condition that has influenced every facet of my life, the decisions I make, and the way I work. Stickler syndrome is a rare condition that no doctor has ever heard of, except for the doctor that diagnosed me. And it affects connective tissue, which are essentially the building blocks of your body, of your joints, your blood vessels, your organ, your skin, etc. So it's a disability that has quite an impact on my well-being. The symptoms and comorbidities on the screen are the diversity, and I guess adversity, people with Stickler syndrome face. And it's a whole of body disability. It affects my senses, my mobility, my organs, my mental health, and mostly my energy. I identify as both disabled and chronically ill and use these terms interchangeably. I also use both identity first and people first language fluidly when I talk about my disability. I recognize and respect different choices regarding identity and language, whilst also believing that disability isn't a bad word and that disability is a core part of my identity and something that I take pride in. I've been trying to pinpoint over the last 2 decades when I had realized I had embraced disability pride, but it continues to evade me. It wasn't some goal I aimed to reach for. Instead, it slowly crept up on me in the mundane moments of my ordinary life. I come back to this quote by Laura Hershey, who states, "You get proud by practicing." And to me, practice doesn't make it perfect, but it sure is liberating. There is a freedom in pride, a lightness felt even with the smallest of flickers, and that flicker sustains me. And that's my wish for the disabled community, for the newly disabled, and for those who will one day be disabled. For pride is a gift. It's a buffer and a balm against a world that continues to tell us otherwise. that we should have no pride. And I'd be lying if I said disability pride is a natural and easy thing. Because the truth is, I practice pride because it's a hard and complex thing to have, especially when your body fails you, like mine does a lot of the time. The biggest challenge for me is the reality of living and working with a disabled body, one that is degenerating quicker than a normal body should. In the disability space, we talk a lot about the social model of disability, and those societal barriers 100% exist. But at the end of the day, my body and my chronic pain and my fatigue are still barriers to me. My disability doesn't care how busy my schedule is or if I have an important event. It's dynamic and erratic, and that's a challenge. Although I sometimes relate to the social model of disability in that society disables me, I also have the view that I am disabled because my body is disabling me. There is a liminality between the way society disables me and the limitations of my own disability. And sometimes that can be really hard to wrestle with. And I recognize there are wonderful things because of my disability and really, really terrible things because of my disability. And those two notions can coexist and they can both be true. When I entered the library workforce in 2015, disability and disability-related issues were rarely spoken about, represented, or celebrated. This silence and invisibility meant I didn't see myself represented in the profession, nor did I feel like I belonged. And since my disability is dominantly invisible, I can pass as able-bodied. I fake being able-bodied a lot in my life, and passing is always appealing to me. If I can convince other people that I'm not disabled, then I can receive all the privileges of being able without any stigma. In some contexts, I pass intentionally because I worry about the consequences of disclosing my disability. Will disclosure affect my career? Will I no longer be considered for opportunities? Will my work be overshadowed by assumptions? I ask these questions a lot in my work as a librarian. Passing for me is about fear of discrimination. Passing as able-bodied feels safe, but at the same time, it also feels untruthful, as I'm someone who believed in bringing my whole self to work, which includes my experience with disability. In 2018, I publicly disclosed my disability at a statewide presentation. And ever since then, I have been open and honest about my disability. Deafness, vision loss, chronic pain, and chronic fatigue have all impacted my life and work. And all these come with a cognitive cost. And I define cognitive cost as a significant mental effort or exertion, often from doing activities that people without a disability would not have to think about or would do so effortlessly, such as walking and seeing and breathing. Non-disabled people may have the privilege of bodies that work in the way that they expect, free from regular pain and monumental effort. For example, it's such a shock to me that people don't wake up in pain or experience daily pain. It's a shock to me that people wake up energized. It's a shock to me that people don't have to strain to hear or see. Inevitably, there is an invisible cognitive cost in my work as a librarian. And I'm tired of laboring that cognitive cost alone. And in today's presentation, I'm going to explore this cost in my career through my experience with vision loss, hearing impairment, chronic pain, and chronic fatigue. So I was born severely myopic and have never known anything different. As such, my experience in the workforce has always been impacted by vision loss. When I was 13, I had a retinal detachment, and since then have experienced varying degrees of vision loss and blindness. And this is what a lot of my life has looked like. And even though my vision has improved over time, losing my sight taught me that to truly understand inclusion, you need to understand exclusion. Visual impairments are actually quite a popular topic in librarianship, but it's always through the lens of serving patrons with visual disabilities, accessibility or assistive technologies, or through copyright considerations such as the Marrakesh Treaty. There is an absent voice of visually impaired library workers. I think of the quote by Marian Wright Edelman, "You can't be what you can't see." The fact that I rarely see other visually impaired library workers represented makes me question my own place in the profession and contributes to feelings of otherness. To quote Michelle Obama, "There is nothing easy about finding your way through the world with obstacles others can't or don't see. When you are different, you feel as though you're operating with a different map, a different set of navigational challenges than those around you. Sometimes you feel like you don't have a map at all. Your differentness will precede you into a room. People see it before they see you." Which leaves you with the task of overcoming. And overcoming, almost by definition, is draining. As a result, as a matter of survival, really, you learn to be watchful. You figure out how to guard your energy, to count every step. And at the heart of this lies a head-spinning paradox. Being different conditions you towards cautiousness, even as it demands that you be bold. And this quote, especially the paradox between cautiousness and boldness, really sums up how I feel a lot in my career, especially when it comes to self-advocacy and asking for accessibility adjustment as a visually impaired person. So inaccessibility is a major barrier for visually impaired staff. And I'm not going to go into that today, as I've previously spoken about accessibility a lot in my career, so please do check out some of my previous presentations. But beyond the technical barriers, there are also exclusive norms in the library profession that have been major barriers in my career. For example, I have been excluded from the opportunities to apply for public library positions and some academic library positions because many libraries mandate the provision of a driver's license, even when it's not an inherent requirement of the job. So these human-made employment practices exclude people like me from library work, and one of the many barriers I must overcome in my career journey. My sensory disability is not limited to my vision, but also my hearing, as I'm fully deaf in my left ear and moderately deaf in my right. And I've worn hearing aids since I was a teenager. There are lots of stereotypes about hearing loss. The dominant narrative in society is that hearing loss is associated with aging, which can lead to disbelief when young people disclose that they have hearing loss. Furthermore, some people mistake hearing loss for a lack of intelligence, inattentiveness, or rudeness. There is also a myth that hearing aids and cochlear implants magically make deaf and hard of hearing people hear, and also that you need to talk louder to people with hearing loss, and all these things are untrue. So deafness is not the absence of sound. When I say, "Sorry, I didn't hear you," what I often mean is, "I didn't understand you." I hear the sounds that come out of your mouth, but my brain cannot always rearrange the sounds to form meaning. My hearing aids allow me to hear the noise louder, but my brain doesn't always make it all out. So since librarianship is a service-oriented profession, there are challenges to providing services as a hard of hearing librarian. And to be honest, above all, open offices are my greatest villain. So even with hearing aids, I still miss out on a lot, as my hearing aids merely amplify the sound. For me, a lot of my listening is done with my eyes. To me, listening is a visual act, as well as an auditory one. I'm a lip reading librarian. I acquire meaning from facial expressions, the slightest movement, and body language. Lip reading is not the art of reading the shape of people's lips. Rather, it's about getting every odd word right and filling in the blank, and getting the rest of the words through context, tone, and facial expression, and then stringing it all together before the person you are talking to thinks that you're rude. It's tiring. And this kind of fatigue is called listening fatigue, and it's common for deaf and hard of hearing people. Ian Noon explains what listening fatigue is. It's about the energy involved in lip reading and being attentive all day long, processing and constructing meaning out of half-heard words and sentences, making guesses and figuring out context, and then thinking of something intelligent to say in response to an invariably random question. It's like doing jigsaws, Sudoku, and Scrabble all at the same time. In addition to listening fatigue, I also experience deaf anxiety. Deaf anxiety is when someone is trying to avoid attracting attention or criticism for possibly not noticing an environmental sound. So one major difference between hearing people and some deaf and hard of hearing people and people with auditory processing disorder is the privilege aspects. The ability to relax, knowing that if anything occurs in your environment, you'll be able to hear it. I do not have the ability to relax. I feel as though I'm always on edge. And some things I get deaf anxiety over include not being able to hear a question or a comment, not being able to hear the direction of a voice calling me in an open space, such as an open office, not being positioned correctly in a room so that my good ear has more of a chance to hear, not being able to lip read because someone is covering their mouth or they're wearing a mask, and being perceived as rude or careless if I miss something. So every task and every situation requires thought and strategy. For example, if I attend a workshop, choosing the right seat is crucial. I must think about positioning myself so that I can not only best hear the speaker, but also be able to keep up with discussions that move around the room. And this is a daily occurrence in work and life. There are many strategies that can be employed when communicating with deaf or hard of hearing people like me. It helps when people face me when they are talking so that I'm included in the conversation and I have the opportunity to lip read. And as mentioned before, I dominantly rely on lip reading, and as do many hard of hearing individuals. If people are wearing a mask, I appreciate if they use visual cues or they use their hands to convey meaning. I also prefer that people have their cameras on in virtual meetings when they're speaking, because if I can't see the face of my speaker, my listening fatigue will drastically amplify and impact the quality and productivity of my day. There's also a stereotype that speaking louder helps deaf and hard of hearing people. This is a myth. Shouting actually makes your words less clear, so I always encourage people to speak normally. If meaning is getting lost, try reframing it in a different way rather than repeating the same words over and over. In society, the onus is always on the disabled person to conform to abled communication methods. But communication is a two-way street. However, for me, a lot of the time it feels like a one-way street with no through road. To me, language is more than speech. Communication is more than words. And hearing does not equate to understanding. Deafness is a culture, not merely a disability. It's a culture that deserves to be celebrated. Another unspoken part of my life is chronic pain and chronic fatigue, which I've actually never spoken about in a professional context. My physical disability is a little hard to explain. It's more than just a bad back and bad joints. For me, Stickler syndrome has caused scoliosis, a syrinx, multi-level spinal degeneration, and all of which cause constant chronic pain mobility problems such as trouble walking, standing and sitting, stiffness, as well as hypermobility where my joints sometimes pop out. I also experience neuropathic pain, such as pins and needles in my hands and feet. So a lot of the time it feels like my legs are trapped in ice water that they can't get out of. And a lot of people with my condition have their joints replaced in the early 20s and 30s because of degeneration. So pain is an unspoken part of my world. It's an unspoken part of a daily life for many people with chronic illnesses and disabilities, because pain has a sympathetic songline and a light at the end of that tunnel story arc. People often tell me that pain doesn't last forever, but I can assure you it can. I can't remember a day in the last 20 years without some form of pain. I see pain every day in my future, just like it has been in the days of my past. And I have come to accept that sometimes there are billowing clouds without silver linings. And often tied up with the narratives around pain is the concept of resilience. And I think there are some ideas around resilience that are glorified in our profession that are really problematic for disabled employees. Although becoming more resilient is often encouraged in workplaces, it can be harmful for those already trying to survive expectations that don't fit their own reality or are experiencing systematic oppression and marginalization. So to quote my AMPA co-founder, Emilia, who has noted in previous presentations, that resilience is relational. And they asked, to what extent does the concept of resilience obscure that a system wasn't designed for someone? Resilience might be seen as admirable for an individual, but what of any injustice or structural failures that surround it? In addition, these exclusionary ideals fail to recognize the dynamic nature of some disabilities. An individual who identifies as being dynamically disabled is able to perform tasks or do activities, for example, in a day or more than once a day, or as sporadically or as often as they can, that same individual may not be able to complete those same tasks or do them at all in the next moment, or in the next day, or the next week. For example, most days I can put my socks on, but there have been days where I haven't been able to put my socks on because of the pain and stiffness in my spine and joints. And this is an example of a dynamic disability, and it's not always acknowledged in the workplace, particularly when it comes to work performance and productivity. Chronic pain and dynamic disabilities are an unspoken reality for many disabled people. Burnout is another undeniable issue in the library profession and in higher education. But for those with chronic illness, it's exacerbated. For me, the fatigue is crushing, a type of fatigue that no amount of sleep could ever cure. The fatigue is exacerbated by pain, and the pain is exacerbated by fatigue, and it becomes an unbreakable cycle. In a society that highly values productivity and perseverance, especially in the face of adversity, fatigue and pain are the most disabling aspects of my life. Our capitalist culture and our industry makes me feel like I must contribute more. But if I do, the less I will be judged for the things I cannot do or require accommodations on. And because I have a marginalized identity that is not well represented in the library workforce, means that I have this conscious, never-ending feeling of having to prove myself. Will that feeling ever end? Or is it the reality of living in a world that is slow to accommodate and reluctant to understand? There is a connection, I believe, between hope labour and disability employment. So in Australia, disability employment is low, and there are harmful narratives about employability, ability, and reliability. And I feel that in the library profession, there are also sentiments that disabled librarians are made for technical roles and not considered for strategic or leadership opportunities. All these factors feed exclusionary ideals and prey on hope labour in our profession, especially for new graduates with disabilities and disabled librarians seeking leadership roles. So in this presentation, I have raised more questions than answers during this exploration of disability identity in the library profession. However, there is a role for disabled librarians in making the profession more inclusive, productive, and kinder. Disabled voices matter. They belong in bold, not in the margins of our profession. Throughout my career, I have learned the power of self-acceptance and self-advocacy, whilst also realizing there is a delicate dance between adaptability and advocacy. Throughout my career, I've heard phrases like, "It's so great to see you overcome your disability to achieve what you have." But the truth is, I have achieved what I have because of my disability, not despite it. My lived experience has been integral to my work. The way my work is framed around inclusivity and empathy, the way I have understood the need for self-care, and that when I focus on the needs of my disabled body, I am a better librarian, a better colleague, and a better manager. Somehow I have found a balance between well-being and productivity, adaptability and advocacy, resilience and the courage to call for change. Inclusion means different things to different people, and there is no prescription for making a disability inclusive profession. However, the more time we spend allowing disabled voices to be heard, interrogating our own biases, and understanding the diverse experiences of disability, the more inclusive our profession will be. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nikki. That was absolutely wonderful. Remember how popular that article was, Chronically Honest, which is in the chat for anyone who missed it when it first came out. And so it's absolutely wonderful to actually hear you speak on it and to kind of expand on some of those points as well. We do have some time for questions, so I would invite you to add any questions that you might have for Nikki to the chat, or you're also welcome to use the raise hand function if you'd like to unmute to ask a question as well. So we'll wait to see if anyone does have any, but for the time being, oh, Mandy, you can jump in and ask before I start with my round of questions.
Sorry. Nikki, that was wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, I've known you for years, but I've learned new things about you from that. So that was really good. And so that's my question is, and with so many, different disabilities that people may have, they're not all obvious and out there and visible. And obviously what you've described today showed that. So as a colleague working with someone, particularly I suppose someone coming new into your organisation, you want to try and make it easier for them, but how do you do that approach? Would it be fitting to go to a new colleague, welcome, love to hear you here, and maybe to say, is there anything I can be doing, in our interactions, in our communication to make your work life easier? Would that be a way that you could broach something to a new colleague?
Yeah, I definitely would do it that way. I find it intimidating when people go straight to the disability conversation. I think it's more, are there ways that you work? Like it can be as simple as, are you a morning person or an afternoon person? Like when do you prefer meetings? That sort of stuff helps. And that actually opens the door for conversations being like, I prefer meetings in the morning because my chronic fatigue is so bad during the end of the day. And then I actually end up disclosing to you rather than aiming to seek out a disclosure and then trying to have accommodations towards it. It's more about asking those broader questions, and then usually people are more honest about what they need, and then the trust forms, and then they can disclose as publicly as I do and ask for things more directly. Yeah, I would
because I think
definitely.
you don't want to go to people, hey, do you have any disabilities? I mean,
that's right. Yeah, I don't recommend. And it does work sometimes. Like some people are really forward about it, but just generally, I would do it the way you suggested it. Yeah, I think that's
okay, good tips. Thank you.
Lex, did you want to jump in?
Yes. First, I wanted to say thank you for hosting this. This is my first time, like looking at like one of the NPA webinars. So thank you for sharing. I've recently been diagnosed with ADHD, and I'm waiting to be diagnosed with autism. And I'm also doing my my diploma of library, and I'm meant to be graduating soon. But I guess I just wanted to ask, as someone who's like trying to figure out um like this industry and who's like recently been diagnosed as disabled, um do you have any tips on like how like new graduates who are disabled could enter this like the workforce?
I think it's a great profession to be a part of as a disabled person, actually. Like there are lots of neurodivergent and disabled people in the profession. And I feel like libraries are way ahead than other industries. And I feel like that's a really great thing. I think you've already started by coming to these webinars and being part of the community and making those connections. And that's what I'd encourage you to keep doing, is making those connections. If you have a social media profile, like put your thoughts out there about different things and how the professions can change. Like that's how I started a lot in my career. So I'm a massive introvert,
Yeah.
and there are things that angered me about the way the profession worked. And I was like, why are we doing it this way, which is inaccessible? And I used to blog my feelings out there, and people used to relate to them, and then they invite me to presentations like this. But I know that's not always everyone's cup of tea, but it depends how you kind of feel. But I think you just, come to our AMPA events and meet people. There's like, we've got like 150 members now. So there are lots of people in similar boats and lots of new graduates and students, working towards getting into profession. And yeah, but I don't know if anyone else has any tips. Emilia, do you have any
I was going to say,
tips as a
I'd agree with you about connections. I never saw myself as someone who would be open about neurodiversity or disability across my career. It was something that I thought that I would just hide the entire way along. But it was actually just working with Nikki that just slowly made me more open about it. I started talking about it more, and um, it like just having those connections not only gave me the courage to be more open about it, but to also recognize where things did need to change, where I could be a part of creating that positive change, where I could actually have a voice. And that impacts other people as well. I think that we possibly don't realize, especially stepping into the profession, how many people are actually neurodivergent or disabled, because I think traditionally we have kept that very hidden, and it's not something that we tend to disclose. And while that's okay, because it is a very personal choice, I know that I've personally benefited and seen other people benefit. And Nikki, you might agree with this. I think our profession benefits as well from seeing people who do feel like they're able to talk about it or to create those connections, being open about it and just having that kind of courage. It's amazing to be able to see other people who you can identify with and connect with, doing things that you're interested in, and to learn from them. And yeah, it's absolutely incredible. So I would agree 100% with your answer, Nikki.
Thank you both. I appreciate that.
Sorry. I haven't seen any other questions come through in the chat, but I did see one about a comment about disclosure. Just there.
Scrolled up, we lost the. Oh, no. Okay, so
I might just mute mics. So Nikki, that might be something I might ask you as well. I think we've got a lot of conversations, and this kind of plays off what Lex was just saying as well. A lot of people, especially new grads who perhaps are entering the profession, I don't think this is unique to libraries or other glamour professions, do struggle with that decision about whether to disclose or not. And you talked quite a bit about, that decision about whether you should be passing or not, what that looks like. Could you expand on that and maybe share if you have any advice for people entering, starting their careers, or who are struggling with that decision wherever they are along the way?
Yeah, it's definitely a really hard decision, and it's something that I still struggle with, even though I am quite public about it. For me, when I reflect, I always worry about disclosure because of the stigma and the discrimination, and we know those things are completely true. All the evidence is telling us that they exist in the workplaces, they exist in society. We can't ignore all that evidence, and that's really scary to me. But at the same time, it takes an enormous amount of effort to hide my disability. And it takes an enormous amount of effort to navigate conversations. And I found once that I was open about it, it's so much easier. I'm less tired, I'm less anxious. Now, because I'm so public, I'm just pretty much really forward about it, and it kind of really helps me. So I kind of, I weigh up the pros and cons, and I still do pass sometimes in my day-to-day life. Like, you're always weighing the risk in certain situations. But for me, the other issue is someone with a rare condition that gets no funding, gets no research, no doctor had ever heard of it. It's really important that people just need to start being vocal about those rare conditions, because a lot of people are suffering in silence without any form of treatment. So, just even having a few people, I think there's 1 in 10 to 20,000 in Australia with my condition. So it's not very many. I've never met anyone like myself. So, being public about that and being an advocate for connective tissue disorders is really important to me, because it's a very complex condition that just not getting a lot of support in the medical industry as well. So they're kind of my motives and stuff that always relay in my mind. And I feel like the positives always outweigh the benefits. I don't regret disclosing. There's been certain individuals that I wish I hadn't disclosed to, but when I reflect back, it's the individual's problem. They don't really respect me for my whole self. That's on them. It's not on me. So that's what I always tell myself.
Does that play into disability pride for you, Nikki? I know you mentioned that right at the start of your presentation about some of the freedom and lightness that kind of came with that, and about disability culture being one to actually celebrate.
Yes, it definitely does. I think disability pride is just about celebrating people for who they are. So it's not about ignoring the challenges. It's not about ignoring the pain and the way my body works sometimes. It's not about ignoring discrimination, but it's about celebrating people as their whole self. And for me, that includes my disability, and that's just the way I live and work. And I've gained a lot of things from my disability. Like, I have a really good memory because of being blind and deaf. I have the most amazing memory ever. I just never forget anything. So that's something I take a lot of pride in, and I wouldn't have that if I wasn't disabled and didn't have my condition. So, but as I said, it is a complex thing. Like, there are days where I go, oh my God, I wouldn't wish this disability on anyone. And I really struggle with the concept of pride. But most of the time, it's definitely there.
And it seems like that comes into, like, when you mentioned that navigating being bold and cautious with self-advocacy. I know, Mandy, you were asking a little bit earlier about, especially people I imagine in leadership positions or management positions, what they can actually do to respond to that, because if it's anything like for me, that's something that is kind of hidden, that the amount of energy that goes into negotiating, that openness, and when to advocate and when to, just navigating what those conversations are. Would you agree that's kind of a hidden aspect?
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I think, when you just go to people in leadership position, I guess one of the things to be like, for me, what I want to encourage leaders to do is actually really listen, because there have been times where I've disclosed something and I say, I need X, Y, Z. This is really important to me for me to get my work done. And then it kind of doesn't happen. And then it takes a lot of courage to even have that conversation to say, I need this in my workplace. And then they go, oh, yes, thank you so much for disclosing that, and we're going to do our best. And then that doesn't happen. So when someone comes to you as like a leader and discloses something or discloses an adjustment, please make sure you actually remember that, and that the same person is not repeating the same thing over and over again about what they need. Because there have been times in my career and a lot of my life, I just give up. If I have to ask more than twice, I'm like, that person doesn't really kind of take my needs seriously, and I kind of stop. So, that's kind of my advice, that even it's invisible and, you don't see it. If someone is really thought about what they need, please deliver, because it's so intimidating to actually ask for those things.
I can just see a comment, a question actually from Samantha in the chat. So thank you, Nikki, for sharing. If I might ask, how do you maintain energy levels throughout the day so that projects are accomplished?
Yeah, which is a really difficult one actually. So I've just kind of realized how my body works. So I am not going to get anything productive done after 2 p.m. I know this to be true, and that's always been true. So I will do my most big things I need to do right in the morning because my brain works in the morning. Um, I've had really good managers at my university who have let me have naps at lunchtime and then regain my energy and then work later at night. I understand that people don't always have that flexibility, but my dream is that 9 to 5 is cancelled and that I can work the hours that suit me with how I'm feeling. So some days 9 to 5 might be easy, but other days it might be I can only work 7 a.m. to midday, then I need some break. That's quite longer than a normal break, and then I want to work, I don't know, 3 p.m. to 8 p.m. I wish that was the norm because it's really hard because my disability changes every day. So some days it's fine, some days it's easier. But for me at the moment, I just tackle the big stuff in the morning. I do little things like emails in the afternoon because my brain cannot function and I'm completely exhausted. And like even when I went to school, like even in primary school, I'd fall asleep when I got home straight away and I'd sleep like till 7 p.m. So it's just like, I just know how my body works now.
Mm. And I can see some comments in the chat around disclosure, some very varied experiences. One person saying that having communities like this, I think this comes back to the connection element as well, have helped them to disclose to their manager recently, and acknowledging that struggle with self-advocacy and making those kind of decisions. And there's also some comments in the chat about some of the challenges where even if those flexible work accommodations are actually available and perhaps you have disclosed or at least very least asked for them, even if it's without disclosing, it is often so dependent on a manager who is educated or understanding around what that actually looks like in practice and why those needs are met. I know that even just recently, having been more open myself, I've had so many really positive comments, but a lot of them are actually quite jarring, and I can recognize that they're intended to be supporting and supportive, and I just go, oh, from a disability culture perspective, there is certainly that lack of understanding and education around what is actually important in the language that we use. So it's interesting to examine, but it's, I think, absolutely incredible as well to see some of those positive stories being shared, you know, in the comments and around what those connections look like and how they inform the choices that people make, and to see people in leadership positions asking about how they can approach this and be more understanding and, you know, what that looks like. Can I provide some examples? Is that about the language that's being used, Danielle? Yeah. So probably one of the most recent ones, and I think it varies depending on who's asking. But the one that I was talking with Nikki about just before we were online was about being inspiring. So that's something that people who are disabled or neurodivergent get a lot. And you know, you're so inspirational, and there's been a lot of work in disability communities around how that can be quite problematic. I'm much more likely to find it helpful if someone else within that community has said that. You know, I've had people within who are neurodivergent say, oh, it's really inspiring to see someone thriving, you know, in these kind of positions. And I understand where that's coming from completely, so I don't mind that. But a lot of the time it can be people from leadership positions going, it's so inspiring to see you doing this. And it's sometimes it can make sense if someone is genuinely doing something inspiring, that's one thing, but a lot of the time it is for very, very basic things, or things that should be very basic, or where you'd hope that they were driving change instead of just going, that's inspiring, moving on to the next thing. And so you can kind of, most of the time I can appreciate that it's well-meaning, but it is something that gets discussed a lot, where it's, you know, we're not here to be, you know, inspiration for you for, you know, non-disabled or neurotypical people, where, yeah, I can see a comment there going, it's patronizing. And, you know, that's something that I'm quite aware of. I've had meetings recently right after I've disclosed where I'm kind of conscious going, oh, am I being talked down to, in this meeting at the moment. This feels a little bit patronizing, and it's very like that takes energy from me as well, just to kind of navigate going, has this, since I've disclosed, that kind of tone and the way you're approaching this conversation changed? So yeah, I think the inspiration one is probably the biggest one. Nikki, have you had any other examples?
No, it's mainly that one too. And, like context matters when that inspiring word is used. Like I got inspiring because I went to school. Going to school is not inspiring. But if you tell me I'm inspiring because I've won all these awards and I'm just a stellar employee, that's different. I like that. But I don't like inspiring in terms of ordinary things that you kind of do. So that's the main one I get. And I get a lot of that on my social media. It's hard to know how to react to those kind of comments.
I agree about, the context is really important there, who's saying it. I get a lot of round lately about being brave about disclosure, and a lot of the time the interesting thing is actually it's a lot of time from people in leadership positions who are neurodivergent or have disabilities, and I'm not really sure how to interpret that one at the moment, because I appreciate it and appreciate that those people have reached out, but it does make me go, oh, should I not have done this? Apparently I'm the only person in a leadership position who is willing to actually step forward and say this, and everyone else who a lot of the time are actually further along in their careers aren't doing it, and it kind of makes you second guess your decision making. So there's things like that that I think just take a lot of time to kind of work through. Those ones are more just individual, where I'm going, oh gosh, I hope I haven't made a mistake, because everyone who's come before me has chosen not to do this and to just privately message about it. But yeah, I think Nikki's probably spot on that the inspiration one is the main one that can be perceived as quite problematic.
And the other one I get a lot is you can't really be disabled. You wouldn't be able to maintain this job and you wouldn't be able to win all these awards and you wouldn't be able to be married and all this sort of stuff. You can't really be disabled.
And Nikki,
But
you just
yeah,
reminded me of another one as well. I think as someone who's autistic, you get the variation of, or either you don't look autistic, you're not really autistic, X, Y, Z, any kind of variation of that. And the one that I saw recently was about masking. So that's something that's an experience a lot of autistic people have. They're masking in workplaces, pretty much trying to hide their autistic traits so that they don't experience some of the consequences related to it. And something that a lot of neurodivergent people do. It's not unique to autistic communities, but I think it gets talked about the most probably in there, and that's probably where it stemmed from. But I saw a variation of everyone masks. And I was just going, it's a bit like saying everyone's a little bit autistic, where it kind of diminishes the challenges that actually come with being neurodivergent or having that disability. And it's quite dismissive with what's actually associated with that. And so the consequences of masking, the long term for people are things around, mental health, suicidality. It has, burnout to a different extent and a different type than someone who is non-disabled or who is neurotypical might experience. And so it dismisses the very real consequences compared to just the everyday kind of, oh, I'm putting on my work face that someone else, might experience. And so, yeah, I feel like a lot of them fall under either being patronizing or dismissive. And I tend to think, you hope that it's well-meaning, but I'm sure sometimes people are aware of, what they're kind of saying. Yeah. Or as we can see in the chat, I would have never have guessed. So I got that one actually recently as well, which was I would have never have guessed that you were autistic. And I'm going, I can tell it was well-meaning, let it go, but it's something that you kind of get, it kind of falls into the you don't look autistic basket for me. Tegan, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, it's sort of around that one. Hi everyone. I haven't seen you guys for ages. Hey. It's the one where you get the I never would have guessed, but people have been commenting for years that you're odd, or that you say things that they don't expect, or that you're a fidgeter, or whatever it is, or like it's like, no, we never could have guessed, but there's been a tirade of comments about your behavior for I really, really extended period of time. You're so quirky. That's right. That's what I get a lot of. Yeah. You know, like you don't need to try and be kooky. I had someone say to me once, in a professional context, like, why are you trying so hard to be kooky? And I was like, oh, I am trying really hard, not. So I found that was so offensive. Like, why do you try so hard to be kooky? I'm like, there's a lot of effort in trying to hide that. And just because you don't see it, it's very frustrating. But anyway, that one.
Hopefully that helped to answer Danielle. I think we started with one example and ended up with probably about 15 different variations there. Yeah, I think they come in a lot of different variations, and it's probably something that regardless of diagnosis, lack of diagnosis, whether someone identifies as disabled or neurodivergent, there is some kind of variation that they will identify with. And I can see that someone else has added, you don't look sick, as, you know, being another variation of that as well. Well, so we might start to bring this to a close then. We've had a really great discussion and Q&A today, which is absolutely fantastic. So thank you everyone who has actually joined us. It's been absolutely fantastic. Thank you to Nikki for being so willing to share so much of her lived experience, and you know, all of the writing that Nikki has done. The article which was shared in the chat, absolutely incredible. If you haven't read it, I'd encourage you to take a look at that, and also any of Nikki's previous work as well. So thank you everyone, and wishing everyone a lovely day and rest of the week.
Before you two go, can
Yes.
I just say thank you so much for sharing?